lighter-than-air flight is man's oldest form of air travel. Today's balloons and blimps are more popular and versatile than ever. Whether it's entertaining crowds at an air festival, covering a major sporting event, or providing a spectacular and memorable display of advertising, lighter-than-air flight is big business. This program looks at the unusual world of balloons, blimps, and some of the publicity stunts that have shaped the success of this kind of aviation.
Balloons have massive advantages over other out-of-home and terrestrial media. They're very, very flexible, firstly, in terms of geographically being able to move an entire promotion from one country even to another. They're also incredibly versatile in what you can do with them. They can target particular demographics, they can move around a country, and they're very, very inclusive. Nobody is offended by a hot air balloon. They're very aspirational, everybody wants one. So we're able to offer a brand building and awareness in a very friendly, flexible package. And on top of all of that, we back the whole thing up with a massive PR campaign, so that for every opportunity to use a balloon, there's every opportunity to exploit that in terms of PR with the media, TV, and any other way we can. The design of the balloon is usually decided upon in conjunction with the manufacturers, the operators and the client themselves. So what is possible, the manufacturer tells us, what they want, the client tells us, and somewhere in between the operator comes up with a final result.
Of hot air balloons in the world. They also have a unique reputation for innovative design.
When someone orders a novelty-shaped balloon, a special-shaped balloon, that it's usually drawn up first by a graphics department, because they do sort of presentation visuals, so if you like, an artist's impression. And if it's a fairly straightforward thing, they'll just get on with it. But anything more unusual, and we'll say things like, you can't do that, how on earth is it ever going to work? And so between us, we negotiate a solution and before it goes back to the client. And obviously from there, we often end up negotiating for quite a while with the clients to come up with an acceptable solution. Something that'll work well, that'll fly reasonably well, not be too hard to operate, but will represent their needs. And I think the classic example of that is the Disney Castle that we made a few years back for them. And we went through a whole host of drawings, and then they finally built a model in order that we could refine the design to come up with a workable solution. The space shuttle, when you stand one up on its sort of solid boosters and tanks, our balloon is nearly the same size as it. But if you did that, what you'd find is that our balloon has a very similar wing platform, but the body of it, the main fuselage, is really, really chunky, because we needed to make it big to get enough air in there to lift the balloon without going to a silly size or an unacceptably tall, thin shape. So we kept the wing profile, we kept the tail fin the same size, but we sort of like put the body on steroids. The upside down balloon is something that we'd sort of proposed once or twice, but I think Festo came to us with the idea independently. The first one we made was an exact replica of their right way up balloon, so they were actually a matched pair. They came up with the idea that we should actually build the basket up inside the balloon. A very simple idea, but it caused an enormous stir when we launched it over Bristol. And the police were called, ambulances were called, a great convoy of cars built up behind it, because people thought there'd been some appalling accident. The FA Cup balloon, we had the FA Cup turn up in the factory, and we photographed it, we measured it, and from that we were able to build the balloon. And we had a bit of a pilgrimage with all the football fans coming down to look at that. When you design the balloon, there are a few things you're looking for. A fairly chunky shape to allow you to get the volume into the balloon, to give you enough lift. Nothing that's too thin or that'll give you problems because it won't be stiff enough, so it won't stand up or it'll bend a lot. There are huge practical problems as well. 5,000–6,000 metres of fabric, all cut, has to be sewn together. And so we've got some fairly refined ways of handling it. You know, mostly of people skills, labelling. That we have project managers whose entire job is to manage that interface between myself designing and my team designing balloons and the teams of machinists sewing them together. And I must admit that's a job that I don't envy them. I mean, one of the really nice things about being a balloon designer is that you really do see the whole job through. So you can design it in a month or 6 weeks. By the time you finish designing, it's going through the build, and then the balloon's finished. You go out, you see it test inflated, sometimes have a trip in it, and then it goes off to the client and you see it around floating through the skies.
Naturally, balloon material needs to be light but tough. The hot air inside the bag can reach a temperature of 250 degrees, so the envelope itself is flame resistant, while the flaps around the mouth at the bottom are of the same material that is used in racing drivers' overalls. To help it withstand both collisions and rough landings, the fabric also incorporates ripstop nylon, which is woven in a tear-resistant crisscross pattern.
One of the fabrics that we use in the top of the balloon is a fabric called Hyperlast, and it's an immensely strong fabric. You can see it doesn't have much of a grain there, but we'll just show you a couple of tests that really prove that it's immensely strong, very non-porous, and one of them is slicing a section into it, and you can see it's really impossible to tear. And what happens is the fabric actual weaved sections bunch up and stop the tear getting any worse. And another way to look at it is by actually breaking the fabric, putting a biro through it. You can see there's a complete hole there, and then we'll mend it. And there you go, hole has gone.
One of the easiest ways of transferring logos to a balloon is to paint them directly onto the envelope. An outline is reproduced on the fabric, and this is then filled in by hand. The paint's used a solvent base to be weatherproof, so the fumes can be pretty strong. An even more permanent method is to cut out the logo in fabric and attach it directly to the balloon. For reasons of size, the logo here is being glued into position piece by piece. This is an example of applique artwork, which is the quickest and probably cheapest way of customizing the airbag. A basic balloon can cost as little as £11,000 or 17,000 euros, but adding extras can multiply this figure many times. The design can also be sprayed on or even reproduced photorealistically. Depending on what the client wants and what he's willing to pay for it, when it comes to customizing the outside of the envelope, the sky really is the limit.
This is one of the larger balloons that we've produced recently. This is 275,000 cubic feet uninflated, but we have produced a balloon for the same company which was 400,000 cubic feet, where the lettering, which this is a scale layout here, and that lettering there is approximately 5 meters high. On the larger balloon it was about 8 meters high. So the whole logo altogether is somewhere in the region of 25 meters.
When the logos have been correctly placed and adjusted, they are sewn into position. This is what the sponsor is paying for after all, so great care is taken at this stage of the operation. Once the balloon has been finally assembled and decorated, it is test inflated in the factory. This gives the designers their first chance to see how the image on the computer screen has translated to the full-scale envelope. It also tests the seams holding the panels together. Each panel is folded back on itself, interleaved with its neighbor, then sewn twice by machine using a lock stitch. The next time this balloon goes up, it will be on its maiden flight in the hands of a qualified pilot. While a lot of advertising can be passed off as merely hot air, Blimps put every last cubic centimetre of that space to work. Because of their scale and shape, they are ideal for carrying a brand name or logo and giving it maximum visibility. In advertising terms, the branding is huge in both senses of the word. Goodyear is probably the most familiar name in the public's perception of the modern airship. There are some 28 blimps in the world, similar to the 7 that Goodyear operates, all run by various companies. A typical blimp is around 200 feet, or 70 meters long, 20 meters tall, and 15 meters wide. Its active lifespan is around 8 years. Since Goodyear launched their first public relations blimp, the Pilgrim, in 1925, they have built over 300 airships, more than any other company. Their fleet of 7 remains the world's largest. Altogether, they log over 400,000 air kilometers each year. Their quiet operation and stability in the air make them ideal for observational surveillance. They are also used extensively as camera platforms for big-scale outdoor events. Baseball and basketball generate huge live and TV audiences in the United States. Events such as the Super Bowl and the World Series are also shown around the world. For the companies who operate the blimps that film these events, the PR implications of having an enormous logo hovering above are clear.
And you can push in a little bit on it and play. Ready to dissolve 4.
Blimp operators tend not to charge clients for their time. All they ask is that shots of their aircraft are included in the coverage.
Dissolve 4.
Typically, a blimp operator would hope to see around a minute of their aircraft on TV for every hour that an event is filmed from the sky. One additional feature that has increased the versatility of the blimps is the Skytacular sign. Developed in the 1960s, this can relay advertising or public service messages and is particularly effective at night. Hundreds of carefully designed bulbs cover the entire length of the hull. The 4 different colored lights can produce 32 different color combinations, each of which can be individually programmed by computer. The aerial messages can be prominently displayed where no other form of advertising can go. Motorways, railways, urban areas, and sporting events can all be targeted with a dazzling light show bigger than a traditional billboard supersite. However, regardless of what advertising is on the side of the ship, the blimps have a rigorous schedule of events to cover, like this one in the UK, the Goodwood Festival of Speed.
We're here today at Goodwood for the Festival of Speed. The kind of forward planning which goes into an event like this, initially it would start anything up to 12 months in advance, when we'd sit down with the various Goodyear representatives of the various countries and we'll outline a basic schedule of the events we want to attend. Once that outline is created, we then look into the logistics of it. Do we have an airfield we can operate out of? Is there suitable accommodation, aviation fuel, all these sort of needs? Once we're at the site, the crew would come out, set up all their equipment, the ship would come down. Now prior to getting to that event, there's also other things we have to look at. Flight permissions. We need to obtain permissions to operate in that area. What altitudes we operate at. Generally speaking, we're providing a platform, we're relaying pictures live down to our ground receiver and then onto the TV companies. For that to happen, we need to transmit, so it's another agency we need to go through. We need to apply for a microwave frequency. Our schedule is mainly concentrating on Germany, France. We're going to go into Holland for a short period, Switzerland, Austria, and then into Spain as winter comes. A typical day would begin with the Met report. Once the weather has been updated, we then know what timings we need to leave. From that we can tell the cameraman what time he has to come out so he can rig all his equipment, and from that we know exactly, okay, camera's done, we can take off, we can attend the event.
I've been doing this now for about 11 months and I've worked on other airships and that, but I'm glad to be on the Goodyear Airship because it's one of the best airships that are going, and create a lot of smiles for people when obviously we do passenger days and things like that, and they always come down, always saying please and thank you, and it's brilliant, you know, the way they say it's totally different compared to flying in a helicopter or an aeroplane.
The qualifications you need to become an airship pilot is an FAA licence, or as is coming in soon, is a CAA licence. And the only way you can get that is to be sponsored by a company, because there's no, you can't just pitch up to an airfield and see an airship there and decide to get a licence. So beforehand, you need to have some kind of commercial experience, or as in my case, military experience. This is an A60 Plus airship. This can do about 13 hours in the air loitering. If you're transiting somewhere, you're looking about probably 9 to 10 hours.
Pre-flight checks are exhaustive.
This thing can fly in cloud at night time, so weather's not a problem with it. We've got pressure management systems and that for any eventualities that could happen. We've got various valves to valve helium. We've got pressure gauges to tell us whether to put air in or whatever, so that if we have any pressure problems and that, we can deal with them inside the aircraft. In the air, it's like a boat. You've got the air currents flowing along, and you sit on them and actually move with the air currents. It's completely bizarre. You know, I've flown helicopters and fixed wing, and it's a weird halfway house. I'd say it's more in between sailing and a helicopter.
Goodyear was the airship pioneer in America. Along with tethered observation balloons, they had been used in the First World War, but when peace came, they were put to a more competitive use. Barnstorming stunts and promotions were common between the wars. People became used to looking to the skies for their entertainment, and balloon races were particularly popular.
You all might get hungry when you got up in the air, so we brought you something to eat.
Well, that was awfully sweet of you. Telephone number on here?
Yes.
The Army helium balloon race was another keenly contested competition.
Bush and I are going to do our best to bring the Navy balloon in first.
It started from Akron in Ohio. It was eventually won by Lieutenant Settle and Bushnell of the U.S. Navy. They managed to float 400 kilometers to Buffalo, New Jersey. The Goodyear company was not slow to exploit the publicity potential of their own airships. They embarked on a series of high-profile stunts. One gimmick involved movie star Jeanette MacDonald, who in 1930 dropped off the first print of her film, The Vagabond King, to a cinema for its premiere. Suitably enough, the film was protected in the fall, albeit to a small degree, by a Goodyear tire. Another high-profile stunt, this time on water. In the 20s and 30s, speedboats had become the new plaything of the rich. Blimps set out to prove that anything a speedboat could do, they could do better. This particular exploit showed off several of the airship's qualities at once. It was fast, certainly fast enough to keep the skier upright. It was also highly stable and could provide a steady pulling force, which enabled the skier to perform even more complicated feats of balance. And if all this wasn't enough, when the fun was over, the same airship could even double as an air-sea rescue craft. Perhaps the makers had an eye on possible sales to the Coast Guard. Certainly in these days before helicopters, the blimp could demonstrate similar versatility. Quickly on the scene, it could drop rubber rings to keep survivors afloat. Like a helicopter, it could then hover over the area until rescue boats arrived. And if necessary, the airship was even capable of drawing survivors gently and safely to shore. One of the biggest advantages of the blimp is its ability to move at any speed right down to a hover. Here the 20th anniversary edition of the New York Times is being delivered to former Governor Al Smith in 1926. Of course, the sheer size of the blimp means that it gets noticed everywhere.
Ballooning still stands as one of the highest want-to-do activities. It's inclusive. People would like to do it whether they're 80 or whether they're 20. And flying in a passenger balloon, or even a unique special shape, is it's got to be a highlight of anybody's life. It's the most unusual kind of flying you can ever do, and I think it must be one of the oldest types of flying. It's an incredible experience.
Balloons speak a universal language and cross all territorial barriers. A balloon flight is becoming an increasingly popular addition to people's top 10 wish lists. Unlike professional surfers chasing big waves around the globe, balloon pilots and their supporters seek out the best balloon fiestas to show off their skills. Today, there are over 10,000 passenger-carrying balloons around the world. There are estimated to be over 100,000 people globally who are involved with the sport directly. In light to variable winds, these 7-story monsters can often travel 20 kilometers in a couple of hours. Clear days and cool temperatures are the best conditions for flying, so fiestas from Wairarapa in New Zealand to Bristol in the UK usually take place in the autumn. A good road network helps balloon retrieval, while an abundance of open fields downwind makes for safer and easier landings.
Yes! I had my first flight, my first proper flight, when I was about 5 years old with my dad, and we actually flew over a chocolate factory. So quite honestly, I thought I was in heaven. I qualified as a hot air balloon pilot about 3.5 years ago, and really what you need to become a pilot is 16 hours flying time. Most people take between 20 and 40 hours, and then of course there are theoretical sides of examinations that you have to do as well. Here at the factory we actually train pilots as well, so that's a really fun part of my job. We do lots of crammer courses and weekend courses, and we also take student pilots flying, and I must say that's one of the fun times. The air traffic regulations of course are the same as any fixed wing or microlights, but obviously we've got some slightly quirky things. We can take off and land in other places other than designated aerodromes or airfields. So to be quite honest, if your garden's big enough, you could perhaps even launch from there. Control a balloon in flight, what you actually do is take off and go in the wind direction, and then you have directional control, I suppose, only vertically with the altitude of the balloon. You can actually put more heat in and go higher up, and in the northern hemisphere you generally go off to the right, and if you release some heat from the balloon or let it cool, you're more likely as you come down lower to go off to the left. Get a balloon ready for flight out of the trailer and up into the air could take as little as maybe 10 minutes, particularly if you're doing something like a competition, but more often than not we take it a bit steady and try and get everything ready within, say, 20 minutes, half an hour. One of of my favourite memoirs, if you like, of flying is when we took off from a place in Austria, a place called Kirchberg, and we actually flew across the border into Germany. And as we were flying over this very small town, we could actually see an umpar band playing, and we were just inching our way across to land in a field beyond them, and they were playing My Beautiful Balloon with the band, and that was truly fantastic.
Unlike balloons, airships have a large number of moving parts, so they are labour-intensive and require a dedicated and coordinated team to look after them, normally around 10 people. As each craft costs around £5 million, it's quite an investment and one that requires the best professional attention. At least one person has to be with the blimp 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, to protect it from harm and check that the helium levels are within limits. Like any aircraft, the integrity of the ship's fabric is crucial. Every detail has to be examined to ensure safe and problem-free operation. After all, it's not just the company's reputation or even client money that's at stake. The lives of all those on board depend on the perfect performance of every component, each and every flight. With a skin made of durable material, such as rubber-coated canvas, a blimp is filled with a lighter-than-air gas, such as helium. This gas is twice as light as air and gives the blimp its rigidity. Getting the blimp in position for takeoff is a notoriously tricky business. The ground crew have to hold the ship nose to the wind while the pilot runs through his final safety checks. Clearance is given to start number 1 engine. At this point, the pilot is able to take more effective control of the aircraft as he begins his takeoff run.
Goodyear Airship, Zulu bombers ready for departure.
Heading into the wind, the pilot builds up speed so that the entire outer hull, acting like the wing of an aircraft, can take on the characteristics of an aerofoil. In this way, the body of the airship is made to bite into the wind and so give the pilot added control as he finally rotates and takes to the air. After a run of barely 50 meters, he's free of the ground and climbing fast. From this point on, his airship can fly all day on the same amount of fuel that the 747 needs to taxi to the end of the runway.
Now just doing the after takeoff check, so I can bring the fuel pumps off now one at a time. Auxiliary fuel pumps, I've got our flashing strobe on underneath the airship. I'll get up to about 1,500 feet. Okay, as you can see, the inside of the airship is what you would expect to see in a light aircraft or a fairly complex, maybe light twin aircraft. We've got a full set of instruments that allow us to fly instrument flight rules, which basically means that you can fly inside clouds without sight of the surface. So the capability is quite good. Although we don't fly any icing or any cumulus nimbus cloud, which is basically anything that could be a threat, such as a thunderstorm. This is the artificial horizon. This tells us whether we're flying level or climbing or descending in cloud. We've got 2 altimeters. You need 2 when you're flying under instrument flight rules. We use this gyro compass because it's much more stable in the turn. The next instrument tells us how fast we're climbing and descending. Vertical speed indicator. We're we're coming round to the right now, pressing the right rudder pedal, airship turns to the right. If we want to stop that turn, then we press the left rudder pedal, the airship stops turning, we centralise the rudders. If we want to go to the left, we do the same procedure. Left rudder pedal, airship's turning. Stop the turn by pressing the right rudder pedal and centralise. And then we've got this one here is the helium and helium pressure. This tells us how much pressure there is in the envelope. And then we've got the ballonnet pressure below, and the two should read the same basically. The ballonnet is it's the internal bladder inside the envelope that allows for the expansion and contraction of the gas. If you didn't have the ballonnet, then you basically wouldn't be able to take off, because the envelope would be full of gas on the ground, and the pressure, as you went up, would increase due to the decrease in atmospheric pressure. So eventually, if you took a helium balloon and filled it up with gas and let it go, and it could carry on going up and up and up, it would eventually burst. If we want to come down, the gas is going to get squeezed, so we would need to pump air into the ballonnet to keep the structural rigidity of the airship. So in that case, we would open the damper and we would lower the nose gently to start the descent. Now what's happening now is that the thrust from the engines is pushing up the two red tubes behind us, pushing air up those and pushing air back into the ballonnet and keeping the rigidity of the ship. The airship's quite manoeuvrable in turns and climbing and descending. Power on. Start the climb. That's a full up elevator. Maximum pitch down. Turning.
Most blimps are able to stay in the air for up to 10 hours. This means that their activities are only limited by the duration of the event itself or the human needs of the pilot. But there are compensations, like the view from 300 meters up. As for the watchers on the ground, their response to the blimp is not only spontaneous, it's proactive. Airships have effectively promoted the sale of everything from banks to hamburgers, building societies to butter, and there's no indication yet that their novelty is wearing off. So long as forward-thinking companies continue to shout their wares, literally from the rooftops, the public will continue to show its appreciation, and the airships will continue to make money for their clients. Since their earliest days, balloons have always attracted those of an adventurous and daring disposition. On that score, times haven't changed.
I got into ballooning by accident. I sometimes put it down to drink, because I was a member of a gliding club, and we used to discuss in the bar various aeronautical things of an evening. And one of these was the recently invented hot air balloons, which the Americans had started to use. This is different from the 200-year-old hot air balloons, because they were using modern nylon fabrics and controllable propane burners, which suddenly made the whole thing much more practical. And we wrote away to America and said, could we buy one of these things? And the answer came back, and we thought, that's far too expensive, so we'll build our own, which we did, and that was the Bristol Bell. I have to say that after we finished building the Bristol Bell, we realized that the American price was quite reasonable, but we'd learned a lot more by that time.
Continuing improvements in technology and materials have led to the resurgence of hot air ballooning this century.
The Atlantic at one time was a very big magnet for balloonists. People had been trying to fly it since the 19th century, and it had never been done, and quite a few people had died in the attempt. So that was a bit of an off-putter, but at the same time, it did seem technically feasible. And there were some American teams and ourselves who were trying to do it in the 1970s. And it came to a head when we were flying the Zanussi balloon in 1978 out of St. John's, Newfoundland. And this balloon we managed to fly for 4 days, and we got within sight of the coast of France before we had a change in the weather and we actually had to put down in the water. And we thought, we haven't quite done it, but we've cracked the system, we know we can do it, we'll do this next year. No one had done anything as close as that before. But unfortunately, 3 weeks later, the Americans, who were also improving their techniques, they sailed into Europe and took the prize. So that was one we missed, I'm afraid.
Once America had achieved that first Atlantic crossing, Richard Branson was one of those determined to take the next obvious step, a non-stop balloon flight around the world. The Virgin Global Challenger, built by Lindstrad Balloons at a cost of £3 million, consisted of a 300,000 cubic metre helium cell and a pressurized aluminium cabin just 4 meters high by 3 meters in diameter. But Branson and his co-pilots, Per Lindstrad and Steve Fawcett, were dogged by misfortune. One flight nearly crashed in the Algerian desert, while another balloon was lost when an accident caused it to take off prematurely. Their final attempt, in December 1998, ended when the balloon came down in the Pacific after travelling halfway around the world. But although this brave attempt was a failure, the publicity it earned for Virgin was of a kind and quality that could not have been achieved by any other means. And for the first time in 200 years, balloons were once again seen to be at the cutting edge of technology. The Round-the-World Challenge was eventually won by the 180-foot-high Breitling Orbiter 3, piloted by Brian Jones and Bertrand Piccard. They finally touched down in southern Egypt on the morning of the 20th of March, 1999, after a trip of over 29,000 nautical miles, nearly 60,000 kilometers. They had been in the air precisely 19 days, 21 hours, and 55 minutes. Perhaps one of the greatest, and certainly one of the earliest aviation feats, was achieved by Germany's giant Graf Zeppelin, named after the man who first conceived the idea of an airbag supported by a skeleton of lightweight girders. It completed the round-the-world trip some 70 years before the Breitling Orbiter. Launched in 1928, the Graf Zeppelin completed its record-breaking flight the following year, returning to its starting point in America in just over 20 days. The basics of the docking procedure haven't changed much since the days of the mighty Zeppelins. These days, the scale may be a little more modest, but the discipline and coordination between everyone involved still needs to be of the highest order. As the airship approaches into the wind, the crew chief gives the command to walk out. Within a few meters of the ground, the blimp releases its 2 main guide ropes, and the command "pick up" is given. The ropes are pulled out to 90-degree angles either side of the nose. This exerts equal pressure on both sides of the aircraft and keeps it pointing directly into the wind. The airbag's tendency is still to drift upwards or turn side on, so the ropes need to be kept taut. Blimps only need one wheel for balance. The entire weight of the cabin and engines is supported by the helium gas in the envelope. Speed is now of the essence to complete the docking procedure. The cable directs the nose cone into the locking clamp at the top of the mast. The mast is secured by 18 stakes hammered into the ground, and a series of cables holds it in place. As it's drawn slowly into the mast, the crew chief checks constantly to make sure the airship's nose is directly into the wind. Once the nose has finally clicked home, the masthead is turned, the locking pin is attached, and the confirmation "locked" is given. Only now can the ground crew relax. Once it has been securely latched to its mast, preparations for the next day's flight can begin. There will almost certainly be one. Between them, Goodyear's fleet of 7 airships appear at hundreds of special events each year, while their 3 US-based blimps alone carry well over 10,000 guests annually on company or corporate business. There's no doubt about it, the airship is undoubtedly one of the major success stories in the history of aviation. It's easy to see why balloons have enjoyed such a spectacular renaissance. Their low cost and high performance match the mood of the times. They're flamboyant and colourful, and they can be flown for leisure or sport or business. And when the pace of life on the ground gets too hectic, the sheer peace and tranquility of non-powered flight is the perfect antidote. With the proliferation of balloon fiestas like this one, even more people are finding out what the hands-on enthusiasts have always known, that lighter-than-air flight is the only way to travel. Not only is it liberating, exciting, and intoxicating, it's great fun. It's also very safe. Unlike an airliner, there are no complicated electronics to go wrong, and all the essential systems are duplicated. In fact, statistics indicate that the people flying 1,000 meters up with nothing but a wicker basket between them and the ground are no more likely to meet with an accident than the earthbound retrieve crew following below. Businesses are also taking up this vibrant commercial opportunity in increasing numbers. And with design technology now so good that it can sometimes even outstrip the imaginations of the merchandisers, we can look forward to ever more weird and wonderful shapes filling our skies in the years to come. Despite their size, blimps and balloons are far from being the dinosaurs of the air. They're actually evolving to meet the demands of an increasingly economic and environmentally conscious age. User-friendly, safe and economic, airships could well become the main transportation medium of the 21st century. Lighter-than-air flight may have been around for over 200 years, but all the evidence suggests that this could be only the start of the story.